In the lead up to Christmas, I started getting in the mood of just letting my mood dictate whatever I read. So I would just start things and then put them down and start other things, and it was great. And I just had all these books going on at the same time, and that's not normally how I read, because that means that I don't usually finish books if I'm just like kind of treating them as a big smorgasbord that I can nibble at here and there. And it was great, and it was great through Christmas as well. So then we come to January, and I'm feeling like, okay, I need to kind of reel it in. I need to like pick books to finish and start going back to my normal reading pattern of reading maybe one or two at the same time, and then finish and then move on to the next one, so that I can actually finish stuff. And yeah, there was only one book of all the ones I was reading. There was only one book which was bringing me consistent joy and consistent excitement. Like when I wasn't reading it, I couldn't wait to be reading it, and when I was reading it, I was loving it, and when I'd stopped reading the bit that I'd been reading, I was like, that was amazing. So yeah, I thought that should be my first book of the year. That should be, of the things I've got on offer, that should be the one that I finish, and I feel that's it's a good way to start the year, right? So the book is this, the Herodies by Ovid. This is a new translation. Santa's Elves made it for me, but when I was looking for translations, this just happened to be the newest one, and from what I saw, it was the one that was the best for me. And what this is Greek mythology. So it's letters, it's poems. It's a series of poems, 21 poems, and they're all in the form of letters written by heroines, like Herodies, I think means heroines in Latin, from Greek mythology, and they're writing to their lovers or people who they love, basically. They're like love letters. It's like a series of 21 love letters. What Ovid did was he went through the Greek myths and picked out women from the stories that everybody knew, and decided to like tell the story, but from her point of view and in a letter to a lover. So, like giving voices and like creating a new sort of intimate space of subjectivity inside of a story that everybody would be familiar with, from Greek mythology. Sound familiar? I swear, if Ovid was publishing today, then the industry would absolutely love him. He'd be so successful. Not that he wasn't successful in his own time anyways, but like it feels really like contemporary, let's say. So all the poems are like this. You can see in the table of contents, right? So the first one, Penelope to Ulysses, otherwise known as Odysseus, and he takes like a point in the story where it would be like most dramatically interesting to see what was going through the woman's mind. In this case, it's Penelope waiting. Odysseus is away and he hasn't come home yet. She has all these suitors, and she has this tapestry that she's weaving in the daytime, and she's promised she'll marry one when she finishes the tapestry, but then at nighttime she's unweaving all of her work, so the tapestry never gets done. So here we actually kind of get to see like the feelings that she's going through, and like how she feels about Odysseus and so on. Most of the women have been abandoned, so there's like a theme going through it. Like he's picked women who have been abandoned by lovers, not always, but like for a lot of them. So the actual events that happen, the things that the women describe are like often the same thing. A man came, they had sex, then he went away, or maybe they got married and then he went away, and then she's like kind of writing to him saying, hey, what the hell, are you gonna come back, or what's going on? And they have, what's interesting is that because he's picked the same events, you get these nuances of characterization, which is what's so good about this. Like all of the women are processing things differently, and the language is beautiful and incredibly easy to read. The translation is wonderful. We've got Dido to Aeneas, we've got Deianira to Heracles, Ariadne to Theseus, that's pretty brutal. Medea to Jason. The Medea to Jason one is great because like Medea is famous for killing her children, amongst lots of other things. And in this one, it's at a part in the story before she's decided to do that really drastic thing. As the poem goes on, we see her getting like angrier and more sort of like unhinged and like kind of psychotic evil. And she sort of says like, the poem ends with her saying like, you wait, I've got I can feel something terrible coming on that I'm going to do. I haven't decided what it is yet, but it's coming. And so like, if you know the story, then obviously like it's not like a cliffhanger because we know what happens. And a lot of these, they rely on you knowing the story. So when I was reading it at first, I thought this wouldn't be so good if you didn't already know a lot of Greek myths, right? But there were a few that I didn't know. There was like 6 or 7, I think, poems, and maybe like 3 or 4 myths. I'll explain that in a minute. But yeah, there were a few that I didn't know, and I understood the story really well from what was going on, and the bits that I didn't understand, there's lots of notes and stuff in this edition, and I'm sure in most editions, to help people understand. You can always just wiki as well. You can always just wiki like the myth of so and so to get the bare bones of the story. But yeah, it's interesting because like it's sort of it's a book of poems, right? Like, it's a poetry collection, but it's also kind of like novelistic in the way that it takes a theme, which is these like spurned lovers and women writing letters, and then it explores that theme through different characters. And then I feel like there's this real progression, especially when you get to the end. So like there's some people say that the last poems weren't written by Ovid, they're written by somebody else and added in later. I don't care, because they're so good and they're such a perfect way to end the collection. They kind of call back to things that have happened before while pushing it in a new direction. So what happens is he does these, what are they called? Like couples letters. So he has a man write a letter. So it's not all heroines. At the very end we have 3 men, and they're famous ones, like Paris to Helen is the first one that comes in, and then immediately after that we have Helen to Paris. So we have the 2 poems are now not only kind of vaguely thematically in conversation with each other, but literally it's a conversation between 2 characters, and they're so good because you can see Paris is this sort of like idiot romantic who's, you know, like being told all these things about like how if you go after Helen then the Trojan War is going to happen, and he's even telling her these omens but saying that, like reinterpreting them to be like, oh yeah, when they say the fire that will burn down Troy, they actually mean the burning passion that I have for you. And he's also just more interesting than that. Like he has this line where he says like, I love you before I knew you, because he was promised the most beautiful woman in the world. So, and he said like that was what made him fall in love. And then when he was introduced to her, he was sort of like his love was confirmed rather than love at first sight. So it's kind of like, you can read it as he's being kind of like dumb and naive, but you can also read it as like his love is something which is like transcending the person that he actually has met and fallen in love with. It's something bigger and spiritual, because the gods were the ones who gave it to him. Well, Aphrodite was. But anyway, yeah, so his poem is great. And then Helen's, like, as a counterpart to that, she's like really rational, and she's like kind of like attacking his idiots. Not attacking, but she's like telling him to like calm the hell down, and she says like, this is really inappropriate, I'm married, and like how could you do this? But she also fancies him, and you see it through as her letter goes, you see how they're such actually a great match for each other. Like she's the more restrained and, you know, like small c conservative one, but she's also really in love, and she needs someone like Paris to kind of like bring out the, you know, the exciting things in life. And, you know, they're actually perfectly suited to each other, even though they seem to be at odds in a lot of different ways. And the other like couplets are like that. Leander to Hero, I didn't know that myth. And Contius to Caidape. Oh, that was such a good ending, because Caidape, oh, another cool thing is that because it's man and then woman, even though like it's bringing men into the mix, the woman always gets the last word. So, you know, like whatever is set up in the man's poem then is kind of like completed and often turned on its head, or even like outright rejected in the woman's poem. And that's the ending with Caidape, the way she sort of like completely rejects Encontius, but then also wants to marry him. And there's just all these contradictory but really interesting feelings that go through. And the Caidape poem is perfect as a reflection of the Penelope poem at the beginning. Not a reflection, but like a kind of a... it shows you this is one kind of love where, you know, you've rejected your lover, but you end up kind of marrying him. And like, I don't know, the people who the commentary in this says that it's a happy ending. I didn't think it was a happy ending. I thought it was really bitter. I thought it was bitter to all hell. But and then we have the beginning, which is Penelope, and Penelope is like, you know, she doubts and she worries and she's not sure what's going on with Odysseus, but she has faith in him and she's waiting for him, and she is really in love with him, and she's waiting for him to come back. And she's like that kind of like, not like naive necessarily, but this idealized kind of marital love thing. And then by having those as the bookends of all the poems, we have all these shades in between of ways that you can passionately long for someone or passionately hate someone while still being in love with them, in the case of Medea and some other like really interesting characters. We have Hermione to Orestes, Hypsipyle. Oh my God, Hypsipyle was incredible. So yeah, I would say if you never read the Greek myths or you don't know anything about them, you could still read this, but you definitely will want a guide alongside. I mean, like I said, I didn't know all the stories, and I still thought they were amazing to discover this way for the first time. And then I read something, like to get the bare bones of the myth after I'd read the characters. So this could be a great introduction to the Greek myths. I think it would probably be better if you had at least some knowledge, but I think, most people do know about, I don't know, like Theseus and the Minotaur and... yeah, a lot of it does. What I'm saying is, it's not necessarily necessary to know loads and loads and loads of Greek myths, even though he's constantly referencing them. And a big part of this is the referential nature, like the way that he's taking a myth that people would know and kind of like turning it on its head a bit, or like kind of exploring it from an angle which people wouldn't necessarily have thought of. And so it's really creative. I read somewhere that like it's arguably the first ever epistolary novel because it's letters, and it's kind of a novel because of the way that the themes are explored and so on. It's got so much yearning and passion and sadness and some tragedy and comedy. There's some like pretty funny bits as well. Oh yeah, and there's one interesting, Sappho is one of them. She's a real person, right? And I didn't really gel with that poem so well, but it is interesting, just like again like a variation on the theme. Like now we're gonna do a real person. One of my favorites, Hero and Leander at the end. Like this was a myth that like I've heard the names Hero and Leander because I think they're pretty famous in like Renaissance stuff, like Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe and all those fellas. But yeah, like I didn't know the story, I just heard the names. I didn't even know it was a Greek myth actually. But yeah, the story is here, and we've got first of all Leander writing to Hero, and what it's like is they're on this place called the Hellespont, which is like this strait which leads into the Black Sea. So one person is in Asia and the other person is in Europe basically, and Leander is the one on the Asian side, and he is in love with what's her name, Hero, who's on the European side, right? And because their relationship is a secret, because his dad doesn't approve of it, in the nighttime he swims across the strait, and she puts a little light in her tower so that he can see the light, and he can go see her, and they have a night of sexy times and love, and it's all wonderful and glorious. And then he has to go back, and the letter begins with like he's been stuck there for a while because of this storm, but there's a sailor who's able to go across, so he gives it to the sailor, and it's a bit like kind of just like a plot contrivance. Like why would he be sending the letter if he could just be swimming to see her? But it doesn't really matter. It's not about that. It's about him telling her like, I want to go see you. I wish I could go. And he just talks about swimming. He talks like the whole poem about like how tough it is to swim and how the storm is really actually very dangerous. But he loves her so much, and he's going crazy that he can't do this more often now that the weather's gotten stormy. And then she writes back to him, and she also loves him so much, and she's also kind of like saying, yeah, this you should be safe, but also this sucks, and are you really faithful? Because if maybe you don't come because it's the weather, but maybe also you don't really love me, and I don't know. And you get the sense of them both being really young and passionately in love, and really bad for each other, because like even though they obviously care for each other, they're both kind of like pushing each other on. You get this kind of like feedback between them, which makes you realize, okay, this is going to end really terribly. Like obviously this is incredibly dangerous what he's doing, and he's saying things which suggest he wants to do it even though it's stormy and like he could die. And she's saying, oh no, you shouldn't do that, but she's also giving so much messages which like we can see would make him want to do that. So it's an example of like toxic love, I think you could call it. They're so passionately in love with each other, and it's sweet, but it's also like you see their personalities, and the way that they love each other is just going to end up to it's going to end in tragedy basically, which is the tragedy doesn't happen in the letters, but we can feel it. We can feel the force of these two people. Their love is not gonna end well. This translation, it's by Paul Murgatroyd, Bridget Reeves, and Sarah Parker. It's got like, the notes are like, they kind of lean towards like an academic, like maybe undergraduate study kind of register. So since it's got that academic style, it's published by Routledge. It's expensive. That's why I asked Santa's Elves to make it for me, because it's not the kind of book that I would normally be able to buy. But it's totally worth it. I haven't read any other translation. I want to now, but like definitely I can recommend this version of the Herodies. And like, what a great way to start the year with a book which is just absolutely fantastic. Anyway, I'm sure I'm going to talk about this again in another video about like how I'm going to gush about it. I'm going to talk about the individual heroines and stuff, but maybe not for a while. I want it to sink into my brain and to my body and to my soul, because it's so good. And I'm just going to leave it alone for a bit now, but I wanted to express my immediate reaction on having finished it. And yeah, I'll talk about it more another time. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you've read the Herodies, or if you're now interested in the Herodies or Greek myths or whatever. And subscribe, like, all that stuff. And I'll see you next time. There's also like I don't know, even though the men are dirtbags and some of the women are like psycho murderers, it's still like very romantic in lots of the poems. It's so good.